And that's only because that way these people can talk. So one of the ways that we wanted to keep the oxygen going in the conference was to mix up the formats a bit. So yesterday, even though we made sure to have time for questions and stuff, we threw a lot of information at you, in terms of the various presentations, or at least 4 major presentations. Today we're going to do it differently. And we're doing it in 2 roundtables. So first, really highlighting some early scholars and their work. All of you folks, you will be doing poster sessions. I'm sure I never even heard about a poster session until I went to my first Sloan conference. And poster sessions are fine, but you don't necessarily get a lot of focus. So one of the things we wanted to do was really highlight and focus some of the early career scholars. So with that, I turn it over to Kathleen Christensen, who will be moderating.
Thank you. Hi. Well, good morning. We're going to change, as Hai said, formats a little bit and orientation a little bit this morning. But hopefully through some of the questions that we asked, we're going to bring it back to the theme of the conference, which has to do with the conversation towards advancing workplace flexibility. But we wanted to step back and also give attention to one of the other major goals that Sloan has had over the last 14 years, and that has been to really support the development of the next generation of work-family scholars. When we started the program in 1994, there was really a very, very, very small community of scholars focused on work-family research. And it was important, I felt very strongly important, that we really develop a number of vehicles or mechanisms by which we could support the next generation of scholars. We've done that through our Centers for Working Families, our MIT Center, our MIT Workplace Center, our BC Center on Aging and Work, as well as major projects. So, and our new program started this past year, which is supported through 2 institutions, through the Sloan Work and Family Research Network, headed by Steve Sweet, and through the University of Pennsylvania program, headed by Jerry Jacobs, which is to directly focus on providing support and resources to early career scholars. So to that end, we have today a number of really fascinating early career scholars who are going to tell us about their work. We're going to talk thematically about some of the issues facing them as they launch their careers. And to start, we're actually going to go one by one down the line, but after that, I hope we really get a conversation going, although this kind of linear format's a little hard to do that. So what I'm going to ask is that if each of you very quickly can tell us your name, your disciplinary training, and there's a reason for asking that, as well as your current title, institutional affiliation, and in like 1 minute, just tell us basically what are your research interests. Kristin.
You know my mic works, so I don't think I have to. I don't think I have to worry about that. My name is Kristin Celello. I am a historian by training. I did my graduate work at the University of Virginia, and I was very fortunate to be a postdoctoral fellow at the Mariel Center at Emory back last year. I'm now an assistant professor of history at Queens College, part of the City University of New York system. My research, I guess. That's yes. The last one. I have a book coming out in the winter of 2009 based on my dissertation research with the University of North Carolina Press. It's called Making Marriage Work, Marital Success and Failure in the 20th Century United States. And I explore how and why couples came, or Americans more generally, came to think of marriage as something that couples and especially women needed to work at in order to be successful. And one of the main ways I look at that is through the professionalization and the popularization of marriage counseling, among other things.
Hi, my name is Marcy Karin. I just transitioned to a new position, and I am now part-time legislative counsel with Workplace Flexibility 2010 and an adjunct professor here at Georgetown Law School. I spent the past 2 years teaching in the Federal Legislation Clinic along with Hai and some others. And what we do is we teach students how to be legislative lawyers, so how to interact with many of the people in the room, as well as some of the people, particularly that you heard in the last panel yesterday. My research to date has really focused on work and personal needs and the intersection of those. And I have a paper coming out in about 2 months that focuses on current federal proposals to address the impact of domestic violence at work and how you can make businesses a part of the solution.
Hello, my name is Christina Matz-Costa. If my colleagues up here are considered in the infancy of their career, then maybe I'd be considered still in the womb, because I'm a doctoral student at the Graduate School of Social Work at Boston College, and I'm also a research associate for the Center on Aging and Work at Boston College. I'm interested in looking at work and family issues from an intergenerational perspective, and most recently I wrote my qualifying exam paper on looking at the different responses between nonprofit and social service sector organizations and for-profit organizations to the aging of the workforce, specifically the scope of flexible work options that they offer. And also for my dissertation, I'm interested in looking at employee engagement from the employee level and from the employer level, and I'm hoping to look at predictors of employee engagement at different levels of life stage, career stage, and age ranges.
Hi, my name is Ariane Ollier-Malaterre. My Ph.D. is in management and OB. I have training also in sociology. I was very fortunate to be welcomed as a postdoctoral researcher by Marcy at the Center on Aging and Work at Boston College. And I am now transitioning to Rouen Business School in France. That's in Normandy, 1 hour west of Paris, for those of you thinking of a sabbatical someday. And I'll be associate professor either as of this year or the next year, depends if my husband can stay in Boston. That's typical work-life dual career stuff. My research interests are in the way that organizational work-life initiatives transform the relationship between the employer and his or her, the employee and his or her employer, and also in cross-national comparisons. I've been working on the U.S., the U.K., and France, and trying to extend that to Europe, and also relying on the fabulous network that we are building at the global initiatives at BC.
I'm Jenny Romich. I started life as an economist and went into an interdisciplinary doctoral training program in human development and social policy at Northwestern University. I didn't quite know what to do with that, but the School of Social Work at the University of Washington found me, and I've been there as an assistant professor now for 6 years. So I'm the senior among the juniors. I submit tenure materials this year. I teach in their policy practice concentration, and my research is on kind of both policy and basic science having to do with families and resources. I'm an economist mostly, so I'm interested in time and money and how families think about and use that. On the policy side, that has looked at different policies around social benefits for low-income working families. I've also done a lot of work on how low-income working families interact with the tax system. And on the more basic science level, I look at family processes in working families, and I've done some work recently on children's household labor, including boys' housework in single-mom families. So.
Good morning. I'm Monique Valcour. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Organization Studies at the Management School at Boston College. I'm also affiliated with the Center on Aging and Workplace Flexibility, where I'm working on a study we're doing of the multi-generational workforce. Despite the fact that I'm also classified as a junior Sloan person here, I feel like I'm somewhat of an imposter because I've been kicking around these conferences since the mid to late 90s when I was a Ph.D. student at Cornell and one of the early cohorts of research fellows at Phyllis Moen's Cornell Careers Institute. So I've had the great pleasure of meeting many of you over the years and hearing about your research and engaging in my own research on careers and work-family issues. I'm interested in the intersection of careers and work and family with a particular focus on predictors of women's career success. I also look at the resources that are present in organizations that can help employees achieve a better integration of their work and family demands, things like policies, but also I'm very interested in the organization of work, job characteristics, the culture of support that exists in organizations, and then similarly what sorts of resources are present in the family domain and what kinds of personal characteristics people have that allow them to be successful at managing work and family.
Thank you. As you can see, we have scholars at every stage of, broadly speaking, early careers, from doctoral student to really experienced assistant professors. What I would like to do in the first couple of questions to the panel is to really ask your thoughts about this field of work-family, and then I'd like to drill down to issues specific to what your experiences have been in your institution on the work-family issues. Rosabeth Moss Cantor, many years ago, raised a challenge which had to do with the myth of the separate spheres, that there was work and there was family. And really the first generation, or the older generation, which I would include myself, one of our major tasks was to really dismantle that myth, to show, in fact, that the spheres were, in fact, not separate at all, and hence we have the language work-family, work and family, work and life, etc. So that this first generation of scholars really had to break down both the conceptual barrier between work and family as well as some of the institutional disciplinary barriers. So the question I'd like to first ask all of you is, in what ways do you see your generation as being similar or different from the older generation of work-family scholars? And feel free to just jump in. We're not going to go one by one down the line.
Right, so I'll start.
Okay.
I think we're similar in that from everything I have read and heard and met and had in conversations with, the people of a different generation of scholars, everyone is passionate and everyone truly cares about what it is they're doing and really wants to look at a problem and figure out, first, diagnose the problem, as others often say, but then second, say, what do you do with that once it's been diagnosed? And I think in that we're very much the same. I think where we're slightly different is we get the benefit of your work. So the connection has been made between that mismatch. Mm-hmm. So people understand. Now, others still need to understand, but a lot of people do understand that there is that mismatch between work and family. And so what we have the benefit of is we now then get to say, well, what are those family and personal needs? Mm-hmm. So we can apply it to domestic violence or marriage or military families or whatever else it might be and take it almost that next step. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to second the extent to which we've really profited from much of the work that many of you in this room have conducted, because work-family, at least in my discipline in management, is absolutely a mainstream field of study now. We met with some of the senior scholars Wednesday afternoon who a number of people mentioned that when they first started their careers in the 1970s or whenever, they were advised by faculty not to study this area because it would marginalize them, they wouldn't be seen as serious, and I have never heard that from any faculty member that I've worked with, so it's very much seen as an important area of inquiry. Articles are published in all of the top journals in my field. I think that some of the challenges that we face are in dealing with managers. For example, in my own teaching, I do teach strategic human resource management to MBA students, and there are still some quarters of managerial thought where work-family is seen as a women's issue. What do we do for working mothers? And so one of my emphases is to really try and look beyond that to work life as a strategic issue that can help a company to really have a competitive advantage, to try and expand it beyond the issue of how do we serve a certain population of our employees to this is something that if we really embrace this, we can actually profit as an organization.
I think probably one difference is the trends towards more globalization of work-family research. It was very interesting for me to read that in the Best of the Best Rosabeth Moss Cantor Award report, they mentioned that 9 out of the top 20 papers that were considered were from authors or with data that was from overseas. So that is really, I think, going to change the field because it's going to incite us to consider more of the national context, and probably we'll have new findings there and new questions and new framing of the questions. But I would say that a similarity is that in some ways and in many ways, work life is still a new frontier because, yes, we all benefit from your work, and it's true that we now have journals that are dedicated to our field, and we have special issues, and we have conferences. But we still have on the field, when we work with employers, we still have difficulties of access to flexible working practices in particular. We still have to study the drawbacks of accessing and using flexible working policies. So I think there's still a lot to achieve with employers and policymakers. And also in other countries, in particular in Europe, work-family isn't a field as established as it is in North America. So there's been a lot accomplished, in particular by younger European scholars such as Stephen Pullmans. I know many of you have been to his international conferences in Barcelona, or Laura Dendalk, who is organizing the next Community Work and Family conference in 2009 in Utrecht. But still, it's a young field in Europe. It doesn't have necessarily the same legitimacy in institutions as other fields, and I think that our generation in Europe faces sort of the same challenges that the first generation faced in North America.
Ariane, can I ask you a question? Is it possible that it may not be as much of a field because the issues may not be as dramatically apparent because the state and organized labor is much more involved, or is it just that it hasn't surfaced?
I think it hasn't surfaced in the same way. It is very true that the public policy, institutional, cultural contexts are so different, and yes, families get more support, and they're not alone. As Tammy pointed out, the family can rely on a broader network of social institutions, and that really matters and makes a difference. But still, when you do employee surveys, I can speak for France, we would have to check for other countries in Europe, work-life and work-life conflict and issues come as in the top issues, top priorities, top concerns of employees. Still, we have the war for talent in Europe because we have less immigration than in North America. And also, it's a major priority of the European Commission to get women and older workers in particular to stay longer and more working full-time in the market. So I do think this is a real issue and hasn't surfaced as much as it has here. So this is our challenge.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on this question, or we'll move along?
I have one other thought on this. Actually, two thoughts. The first is, I thought that was an excellent question about the larger context, the policy context in Europe, because I think in some ways the nature of work in the U.S. over time has shifted towards much more contingent labor for hourly employees, much more expectations of round-the-clock labor and flexible schedules and, flexibility on the part of the employee to respond to the employer's needs, I think are probably different now than they were 20 years ago. And among salaried workers, we know work hours are increasing, and the expectation of what it means to hold down a professional job has been ratcheted up over time, and I think that in some ways poses new challenges to thinking about scholarship. The second thing is, I think as the field matures, we necessarily have to get a more nuanced understanding of the relationship between our research and policy change. And my personal field is not actually work studies. I'm more a poverty researcher, and this is another field where you clearly see in the war on poverty, there was this great myth that if we understand the problem, then the political system can solve it. And my guess is the same thing might have happened in work-family. And as I look at, the workplace flexibility 2010 agenda, I'm wondering how much of that might have been on the 1970 agenda as you think about this. And I think there's a need, and I know we'll talk a bit more later about policy and research, but I think as scholars we have to enter this with a bit more nuanced sense of we can do important scholarship and still not much will change.
It raises a lot of questions, but take us off track. So, let me go to a number of you have, just by nature of your backgrounds and also comments you're making, really alluded to the way in which so much of the efforts in, quote, work family are interdisciplinary. What do you, and yet much of the training for many of you and for many of us was in fact very disciplinary. What do you see as the incentives or disincentives to engaging in interdisciplinary research, particularly for those of you who may be on tenure track lines in disciplines?
I would love to respond to this, actually, because this is something I think about. Oh, I'm sorry, Edward. For those of us who are in tenure track positions, there are very strong disincentives that prevent us from engaging in interdisciplinary research. We are really required to publish in a limited number of top-tier journals that are specific to our own disciplines, and so there is risk associated with working across a disciplinary boundary and perhaps having our research appear in a journal that's not really recognized by scholars in our fields. So there are very strong structural factors that prevent that, and I think that one of the most valuable resources that we have to promote an interdisciplinary focus is the family of Sloan centers. And I know that there's some question as to whether or not this is going to be the focus of the foundation going forward to continue to fund these types of centers. But I must say that throughout my training, being affiliated with the center at Cornell, which was very multidisciplinary with sociologists, psychologists, economists, policy people, really about 6 different disciplines involved. Although we didn't necessarily specifically publish with people with a different disciplinary background, there's a great deal of discussion of presenting seminars and listening to research being presented by people in other disciplines, getting a much broader perspective. Similarly, at the Boston College Center now, we have people representing a number of different disciplinary backgrounds, and so as you're going through the negotiation process of trying to decide which measures, for example, will be placed on a survey, and each person has the measures from their discipline, it really does result in very substantive discussions about exactly what is the meaning of these constructs and why are they important, and where do we have commonalities. So I think that there are very few vehicles aside from the Sloan centers that are inherently multidisciplinary that serve to actually provide incentives to have an interdisciplinary focus and engage in interdisciplinary research. Mm-hmm.
You, in some ways, I think, stole my thunder here, because that's exactly that's one of the. Well, actually, I was going to start with a plea for not interdisciplinarity, but I wanted to, in some ways, sort of give a defense or a plea for history, because I can't tell you how many people I've met this week who said, "Really, you're a historian, and you're here at our conference?" And there's a reason there are cliches, and I think it's because there's truth to them. And you can say that if we don't know history, we're damned to repeat it. And I think that's something that Jenny's comments about sort of, well, what was it like in 1970? And I think my new generation of historians who look at work and family issues are really trying to integrate in I'm a person who studies social science, and then also the history of social science and the ways we approach these issues, as well as also trying to participate in the contemporary debates. And I mean, of course, you're not going to go to that ancient Roman historian who teaches at your school and say, "Hey, what are you thinking?" But I think we do have something to offer, and I think I felt really, really fortunate to have sort of been able to tap into this Sloan network. In my time at the Mariel Center, really this in particular helped me. I was working on a chapter, the last chapter in my book, about the 80s and the 90s, which some historians will tell you isn't history. I think it is. My undergraduates don't remember the 80s, so I figure we have to start writing about it and talking about it.
It's history. To me, it's life.
No, I know. And that's, my dissertation advisor and I have that conversation frequently. But I think that, and I was able to put my work out there, and it was interesting in terms of trying to think historically about stuff that people are still, relying on those same sources in their own contemporary work. And I think that was really important. And it really helped me as a scholar, and I like to think that I hopefully added something to their conversation in the way they thought about it, to think, okay, the origins of the divorce crisis in the United States aren't just no fault post-1970s, but it's been something that's been ongoing since at least the 1920s, if not before, and having those sorts of conversations. On top of that, it's actually helped me professionally at my institution, where I was, because of my involvement in sort of more interdisciplinary work, I was asked to take over a program, an honors in social sciences program, because they said, you're one of the only people we can think of on our faculty who has worked with people in different fields. And so it speaks in some ways to the limitations Monique was talking to, but I think we can really there are ways we can push that forward, and I hope we continue to do that in meetings such as this one.
Mm-hmm. And as you come forward for tenure, will you feel pressure to publish primarily in history, or will you feel that you've got the opportunity to perhaps do some interdisciplinary research and writing?
I've spoken a lot with people about this because as we were going around the early career scholars meeting on Wednesday, history is a discipline where you publish a book as opposed to where you publish more articles. And in some ways that's liberating and more freeing to me because, my book is going to be in a gender and American culture series that has historians and people who do English and then some sociology. And so it's more broad in terms of that. So I think I am fortunate in that I'm able to do that. Now, do I think I could get something published in a major sociological journal as a historian? I'd have to really reconfigure myself in certain ways, I think. But my institution is pushing for interdisciplinary in a way that I think some of the other people I've talked to, their institutions aren't necessarily as interested in.
I'm not tenure track, but I have had multiple conversations with people, both in the legal academics as well as in the regular academy. And what's slightly different about the legal academics is legal academics are often law and something else. So by very nature of being a legal academic, you are interdisciplinary in many ways. And much of the advice I got when I was shopping this paper that's getting published this summer, as well as some previous ones, was go in the general journals, the general legal journals. But rather than going to a women and family legal journal, go to a top legal journal. So publish in the Stanford Law Review rather than something women and families.
That's interesting.
And I'm also going to speak from a slightly different perspective as a doctoral student. But having had worked for the Sloan Work and Family Research Network for 6 years, I was able to see the benefit of interdisciplinary collaborations across disciplines, and was from, when I was an undergrad working on these issues, I was very drawn to the fact that this field was so interdisciplinary and that I could work with people from a variety of different areas. That was very exciting to me. But there are a lot of barriers in doctoral programs that hinder you from being able to collaborate with people outside your department, outside your institution. Usually dissertation committees have to be, the majority of the people on your committee have to be within your discipline. And in this field, a lot of times there's only one work-family person in your department or maybe in your entire institution. So if you want to get the best work-family people on your committee and to learn from them, it really makes it difficult to do that.
I know for many of you who may, in fact, be outside academia, this may sound like inside baseball, but the fact is it really makes a difference as people are trying to advance their careers. So let me just throw it out to the audience. For those of you who perhaps are in academia or outside, what has been your experience with trying to have a more interdisciplinary perspective? Pat?
Which I found found then and still find kind of extraordinary with what we do for a living. Career counseling, career coaching. Never mind that. One of my colleagues was very kind to me and took me into the organization psychology program as a result of that. And there are students who are interested in work family research there. But within my institution, it's very difficult to find other people either in the department or inside of the department who do this research precisely because of what's been said up here. It is interdisciplinary, and it's impossible to publish in top-tier journals unless you're in work psych or management in terms of work and family. It just isn't the place for it. So it's a huge problem.
Margaret?
I've had a more positive experience, and listening to you, I think it may have just been fortunate. First of all, I went through a Ph.D. program at Princeton in sociology, but I had a concentration in demography. So that itself brings together, a wide group of disciplines, but people will have one sort of core methodology. So it was not an issue at all for me to have a political scientist, for example, on my committee. Now, my dissertation was not precisely about work-family. And now I'm at Syracuse, and I'm in the Maxwell School, which, again, has an interdisciplinary focus, and where you're not physically housed with other people exclusively in your department. I'm in an interdisciplinary center, the Center for Policy Research, which focuses on domestic policy. And I have a publication coming out with someone who's an economist by training but is in public administration. And my department is, I need to publish certainly in sociology journals, but their take is they will very clearly, articulate she published in blah, 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 and this was very appropriate because it's in her field of work and family. Mm-hmm. And then the last, very fortunate thing is we have a chancellor who prizes interdisciplinary work very, very highly. And I think the department attitude and the Maxwell attitude predate that. Mm-hmm. But that, I think the person at the top at your university can make a very big difference.
Nancy Cantor, right?
Yeah. I don't know how to incent other chancellors to be like-minded, but it is a great priority of hers, so that all of those things together make it much easier. Mm-hmm. My kids have been lucky.
Okay, a couple more questions. Donna, then Arlene, and then we'll come back.
I'm not from the Academy, and you'll be able to hear that in my question. I really appreciate all the work you do. But one thing that is been on my mind for several years now is, and it relates to the interdisciplinary thing we're talking about, how many of you ever have an opportunity to work? I focus on the work part of the work-family equation from the business standpoint. So how many of you ever have tried, or is there opportunity to do interdisciplinary work with the business schools? What is happening is, when, from a work perspective, who comes in as new entry-level managers may have heard the word, but they don't really understand any of it. And we have talked to business schools about it. And the deans, and as I said, this is unknown territory to me, but apparently the faculty are responsible for the curriculum. Mm-hmm. So, in the ideal stage, you would get this data, flexibility, workforce effectiveness into the leadership models that are taught in the business schools. Is anything happening there?
I'll give a plug for one of my colleagues at the University of Washington School of Social Work, because we have an interesting partnership with the business school there. The partnership came out of a social work alum who's married to a business school alum. The business school alum worked for a local coffee shop called Starbucks, and was interested in. They have a strong social responsibility mission as part of their corporate work, and he's particularly interested in it. And so they have supported some work at UW to form a partnership between the School of Social Work and the Business School. And my colleague Anna Haley Locke, who I think some of you know and was one of Susan Lambert's students, co-teaches a class and has co-taught it for the last few years with a business school faculty member, focusing, I'm not quite sure what the title is, but it basically focuses on the dual bottom line. How do you design jobs to support people's whole lives? And I think it's been an interesting experience to have social work students and business school students in the same classroom, talking to each other. They're both groups that do a lot of group work, but only with each other. And so when she puts them together in groups, she's had some really interesting experiences. And also by nature of how the course is funded, they've had some heavy hitters come in and talk. Last week she had Pete Nordstrom from Nordstrom Department Stores. She's had Jim Senegal, the CEO of Costco, come in and things like that. And folks talking about how to set up these work-family programs in their own companies.
Can I respond? It's been slow. I've tried to work with business schools for the last 10 years, and it has been slow. The key is to find the right person. I mean, I don't know how many of you saw it, but in yesterday's paper, our colleague Stu Friedman has a big piece in the business section as a top guru to all of his students because of his course and his new book on leadership, where it's leadership in not just work, but leadership and work in your own family and bring them together. But it is hard. Anyone else want to respond to Donna's question? And then we'll.
I'd just say, as a management school faculty member, that in general, work family is not being integrated into any core curricula of management schools. It generally does exist in some form in an elective capacity. So I teach 2 MBA elective courses. One specifically is on career planning and work-life integration, where students are really taken through a very intensive process of self-assessment and thinking about exactly how they want their lives to unfold, with a heavy emphasis on their involvement in non-work domains. The other being the strategic human resource management course, where we really do look at work-life as a strategic issue. But and it's funny because there is this growing emphasis on corporate social responsibility, on ethics, on the whole green thing, and that is feeding a little bit more and more into curricula. But work family as something that everybody needs to be exposed to is not it's not seen as one of the central things. But if you work with any of the students who had my class, hopefully you'll have a different type of attitude.
I think it's probably a tough call because of the students, because for once they're very young, and I'm convinced that you grow more aware of the work and family issues and the stakes at play as far as you advance in your life course. Young female students, they don't seem to perceive, from my experience, they just tend to think that gender equality is a given, and they absolutely don't grasp that by the age of 30 they might change their mind about that. So it's an absolute necessity, but I think the way around that, also because students want to do finance and marketing, and already management and HR are viewed as soft skills that anybody can acquire anytime, so they really focus on finance and marketing. So I think the way around that is to embed work family into, exactly as you said, other courses like career development or strategic HRM or organizational behavior, but not, posted as a pure work and family courses that we only attract 3 female students. So.
And it may also make sense, and I hadn't really thought about it till now, to really target the mid-career MBA executive programs. So not necessarily someone coming directly out of school, but maybe coming back for that intensive, summer or weekend mid-career session. Arlene.
Yes, Donna really asked my question, and you've given wonderful answers, but it prompts me to just make an observation that this discussion has many similarities for the business practitioner, because business practitioners have struggled, work-life practitioners have struggled knowing that they can't really make things happen in the company. Often they don't hold either the purse strings or the power strings, and that they need to relate to benefits, employee relations, public affairs, organizational behavior and organizational development, and building those bridges has been very difficult. And I would agree with Ariane, who said that what seems to be most successful is not having a competing track, but helping people see how work-life issues are part of their discipline. And one thing that's been helpful in that is the kind of thing someone referenced, which is a meeting or a gathering where the agenda is to find common ground. One thing we have found in that, though, is that the work-life person has to do 90% of the work of the bridge building. And that used to make me kind of irritated, but now I've just kind of sort of resigned that that's the way it is. And if these connections are going to be made, the major responsibility will fall on us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This kind of goes back. When I first developed this program in late '94, I was very conscious about the fact that I felt we needed to be very problem-focused, not theoretically focused, that we needed to be interdisciplinary, and that we needed to develop partnerships and bridges across different constituent groups, business, policy, et cetera. I guess my concern, and I think that some of what you've said so far has allayed that, is that if there's not this outside incentive through a funding agency, if there will be inside incentives within the institutions to continue that kind of problem-focused, interdisciplinary, bridge-building enterprise. And, as you were saying, Kristin, about the interdisciplinary center at Queens, and some of you have said through your own efforts, it looks like there are some internal incentives that are developing, which I think are really important. One last point, and then I want to move on. So, no, go ahead.
I was just, when we first started talking about this issue of interdisciplinarity, I said to Maureen that what we're seeing on our campus is that now there's such a push for interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity that really psychologists and sociologists would not be considered to be in different disciplines.
Really?
I mean, now they're looking for, joint projects between biologists and philosophers. I mean, honest to God, you just sort of try to imagine, and our president, who's an astrophysicist, wants to get artists involved with engineers, and I think one of the new frontiers is that we're all going to have to stretch our brains much farther than we have so far.
Well, this is a nice segue to another question I wanted to ask our panelists, and that has to do with the relationship between your academic work and the bridge building to other disciplines. Clearly, in the academy, you are primarily going to be evaluated in many of your departments or disciplines based on your academic publications when you're speaking to other academics. But I think given, as Marcy said, the passion that many people feel, there's also this desire to perhaps make a difference and to communicate with other important constituent groups, the media, policy makers, business practitioners, et cetera. I can speak from experience that in the 1970s there was this very, I think, naive, simplistic notion of if we just did really good research, we'd make social change. And I don't think anyone believes that now. So the question, well, maybe, but I can tell you from my experience it doesn't work. So I guess the question I would ask you would be a couplefold. But first, how do you think your scholarship is relevant to the public policy debates and the business needs we heard in yesterday's conversation? And what do you think would be some of the best ways of making those connections or bridges?
I'll start again. My research and papers are about public policy, and so I think that connection is very easy for me in a way that it might not be if I was developing methodology in a study in that regard. And so I would just encourage other people to say, okay, take the conversations that you've heard here about packaging and still continue to do what you need to do to get tenure and to have that on you. But then also think about, now that you have that 60-page document, how can you then have that press release that does get used by other people? And then they can follow in deeper, and to just develop the connections outside of your original.
I think yesterday we talked a lot about the importance of context in thinking about these issues on multiple levels, thinking from the employee perspective and the employer perspective simultaneously. And I think looking longitudinally over time on these issues are all very important. And I think that that's going to be the future of this field, taking it up. The framework has been laid. The amount of publications in this area has increased exponentially in the past 10 years. I remember when I originally started working for the Sloan Network, there were about 800 peer-reviewed publications in the Work Family Literature database, and now there's over 9,000. So this field has really grown, in it, especially in the academic part of it. And I think the next stage for work family researchers is going to be taking up to the next level methodologically and statistically, and in terms of really making this link between research and action, and translating our research into information that can be used by the key decision makers. And I think that one piece that might be missing, and I don't know if it's completely the responsibility of the academics, but I think there definitely needs to be more training in how to make that link. The training of academics and the training of these decision makers is very different. We come from very different worlds. I've experienced this many times at the Center on Aging and Work when I am working with Kathy Lynch, for example, on the employer engagement strategy for the center. We're constantly debating that my view is this and her view is this, and how are we going to reconcile that? And I don't think we get proper training on how really to connect those worlds. And so maybe it starts in doctoral programs. And I feel like because this field is so interdisciplinary, and that there may only be one or two work family researchers at an institution, I wonder if online courses or some kind of way where we can connect across time and space and train each other and across disciplines, maybe that's one solution. I threw out a lot of different things there.
I think that the impetus for really being able to have an impact on practice stems from having a real passion about the subject of your research. And I was intrigued yesterday during Maureen's talk when she shared the fact that she had met with a legislator who wanted to know what was the bumper sticker on your car. And that kind of got me thinking, because I have bumper stickers on my car, and the one that I'm most fond of is a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, and it says, "You must be the change that you want to see in the world." And that, for me, is a lot more than a bumper sticker. It's kind of a driving principle. I kind of go around chanting to myself, "Be the change, be the change," when I'm when I'm encountering someone who's incredibly resistant to common sense and that sort of thing. So my own research on work and family and on careers is something that is deeply, deeply engaging to me. I feel very passionate about it. And so that motivates me to try and to have an impact and share that subject in a lot of different domains. So in my teaching, I have elected to teach in the area of work and family and career management. I don't spend a whole lot of time, but I have on a number of occasions gone out and addressed practitioner groups. Every single article that I write has a section on implications for managerial practice at the end. I train future managers. I encourage them to really, think about this thoughtfully. I provide demonstrations of the positive benefits of being family supportive on a number of quantitatively measurable performance-related outcomes that organizations care about. And so I think that really comes from, I think so long as you have a real passion for what you're doing and you're excited to share your knowledge, that you'll find ways to address a number of different audiences with that.
I would say one more thing about doing policy work is, as an academic, I've learned to know my place in the policy world. And policy change happens when advocacy groups and think tanks and academics and political staff and nonpartisan staff work together and know each other. I'm very lucky to be in an applied school that part of our practice is policy practice, and that's my area. And I also, like Monique, am passionate about doing policy change. I didn't come into this work to be an academic. I came into this work motivated by the problems. One of the things I learned about halfway through the tenure track is to start labeling all the policy work I do service, and to demand credit for it in terms of the outside world, but to also recognize that sometimes the biggest thing I can do is to feed stuff to the other parts of the policy process. So, I can work with advocacy groups around, they want a fact sheet that they can use to support their agenda. They wouldn't use I would have to put a lot more disclaimers on it than they would, but I can work with them in terms of sources. And likewise with both partisan and nonpartisan staff, that often the work comes from knowing those people and working with them behind the scenes and letting them do their work. I'm not a policy maker, but I can help them.
I guess, can I say one thing?
Yeah, please.
I know there's some hands. I tend to think of this question, approach this question a little bit differently, perhaps because I'm not a policy historian, but I tend to think about it as also in terms of interacting with sort of the print media, with the news media, et cetera, and talking in these ways. And sort of, how, we've all read those articles which are, beautiful in the New Yorker, the New York Times, and they're completely impressionistic. The opt-out revolution is one of my, and there's some anecdotes and there's a little bit here and there. And I think it's important, and there are ways to try to sort of get an academic viewpoint expressed in a non-academic way in these sort of sources. And again, I think from personal experience, I was fortunate that at the Mariel Center we had a communications person who had ties with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and others, and so they knew who to call to ask for certain things. And I ended up being in this huge spread in the AJC when I was there, and then that led to me being on CNN, which was like very scary for me at the time. They did my hair like Nancy Pelosi, so it was like woo. But it was a crash course to me in terms of how I'm not talking. How do you speak about that? And I think it's forced me to learn to search out people I know who are journalists or the communications people within my university to sort of try to get your name out there. And it doesn't always work. We had a documentary film crew come to the Mariel Center last year because Stephanie Kuntz was talking. They wanted to talk to her, and someone said, "Hey, you should talk to Kristin as well." Of course, she's in the film, and they're like, "Oh, we had to cut you out," But yeah, I think we all appreciate the work of scholars the senior scholars who are out there who are willing to say, "Oh, try talking to this person. You might end up on the cutting room floor." But I still got to go to the premiere at the Tribeca Film Center, and that was cool. And I was in the credits. I was like, "Can I put that on my CV?" I don't know, but I think for me, that's also a way we can do it in terms of, even if we're not policymakers, we can be people, because policy is made in a variety of different sources and forms, right? And it's on the State House floor. It's also in the larger sort of world of the media, and I think that's important for us to not be afraid. I was petrified, but I was glad I did it, and I think I learned a lot from it.
I'd like to second Tina on the academic-employer partnership, because I come from the business world. I worked 10 years in companies, and I can see how the way people interact is so different, and the time horizon and the expectations and the standards are different. I think, that maybe doctoral students should be encouraged to spend time on the field, because we see many dissertations that get away with just, studying some data. And so you you are trained, but what you have seen is an Excel file or an SPSS or Stata file, and I think they should be encouraged to really spend time on the field and maybe do internships. We have a way of funding dissertations in France and in other countries in Europe that you work part-time for a company for 3 to 4 years, and you work part-time on your dissertation, and that really encourages you to live with the business world instead of just reading about it. It's not the same experience. So I know that having this 10-year experience really helped me. I did a case study in a multinational pharmaceutical company in 3 countries, and I mean the way we interacted was just easy because I knew how to, and it was different from the academic. And I was fortunate enough that it's also an effort, on the part of the doctoral student, because you have to do your academic stuff on the one hand, and of course you have to do different reports and different presentations and different conferences and conference calls with the employer. But I was fortunate enough that they used part of my research in their key performance indicators and strategy formulation, and that really feeds the research, because then you get better access to better data, and it's really a win-win if you can develop these collaborations. But to do that, you really need to spend time on the field within the company and not just at your desk. So I think we should encourage students to go out there, and other scholars for that matter.
We only have a few more minutes, so let me ask each of you, or for those who want to address the question. One of the intents of the Sloan Foundation, and I think of our entire community, has been to provide support for early career scholars. So the question I would have for you is, do you feel that your institution is supportive of you in your early career stages and as you try and address both your own work and personal needs? And what might the work-family community do to be of assistance or of resource to you?
Jenny and I have been talking about how our institutions are polar opposites.
My glass is half full.
In some ways, yes, and mine's perhaps half empty. I feel very fortunate in that there are a lot of mechanisms in place at Queens College and in the CUNY system to help the career aspect of things. I come in with, I have 8 course reductions over the first 5 years that I can take wherever I want. If I can structure, certain things to get my research done and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, we have, and I think I didn't even think to ask this question, which shows how much I just assume that at least the academy is really good on work-life stuff. We don't have any paid family leave at all. We don't have, professors who have children are expected to go into sick leave. If they haven't accumulated that enough, then they have to take unpaid leave, which if you're living in New York is, one of my colleagues literally had to move out of her apartment and move away to live with her parents because they could no longer afford if she was going to take any time off when she had her baby. And so for me, it's been eye-opening that I feel really supported career-wise and the personal stuff. And it's hard because, certain campuses have developed, there's the paid the family leave. Queens is there, and Brooklyn's all about the child care, which we don't have either. And so it's, I think what we need is, and we do a lot of talking about all the other institutions around us, the public institutions that do have those supports. And I think we need to just remember that the academy, when we think of it as Jenny says, UW has, she's got lots, and we don't have a lot. And I think we need to keep talking about those things and having those conversations, particularly at a time when we know the economy is not looking great, particularly if you teach at a public institution, and it's hard to sort of keep pushing these things forward, and I think that's essential.
Yeah, probably one tangible things folks can do is, as your doctoral students go out on the job market, encourage them to look into this and to put pressure back onto colleges and universities.
Yeah, I can't believe I didn't ask about that. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, the University of Washington, I don't know if Bob's still here, they're one of the advanced schools, and from at least the vantage of the School of Social Work, which is probably a early adapter in any kind of work-life balance things, we have a very good set of policies. We have up to 3 months leave for maternity leave. They'll reduce both if you're the parent giving birth and if you're a non-birth parent. I think the release is a bit more generous if you have the birth because that's a medical recovery as well. On the books, at least, they have options to go part-time for 2 years following the birth or adoption of a kid. And I know people who have used that across campus. I am one of, I think, 6 untenured tenure-track faculty members, and I'm the only one without kids at this point. But I think one of the things that people can do if you have kids that I didn't think about at the time was actually negotiate at the front end. I have 2 colleagues who, going into the school, negotiated for an extra year on the tenure clock going in, and at the time it's free for the department to give them that, and it gives you some extra time along the way. And then if you add on top of that a year off if you have a child during that process, I think that's something that's helpful.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, for those of you who are planning on negotiate after you've got the offer letter.
Right.
Phyllis is always full of very, very useful tips. Somebody should have been writing these down for years, and we should hand them out. Sloan could publish it and hand it out to new students. So I'd just like to respond to the portion of the question that was specifically about what can Sloan do, what can the larger work-family community do, as opposed to talking about policies at my own institution. The challenges that we face as tenure-track junior faculty are really about what we need to do to get tenure, and it's about hitting the ground running with, a robust research program. It's about getting things written, getting them out to journals, getting them published. And so we need data, we need mentors, we need people to read our papers and to give us developmental feedback. And so all of those things can come from within the community of senior work family scholars. So I think my own career has been enriched by the fact that I've had support from Sloan over the years. I've been able to come to a number of these conferences. I've been able to attend other conferences. I've had access to data that's been collected by Sloan centers that I've analyzed and been able to publish articles from. Sometimes as a work family researcher, you may be alone at your institution. You may not have a lot of natural colleagues who will step into a mentorship role. So, the ability to come to these conferences, to meet people, to build this network from whom we'll be able to identify people who will write for us as external reviewers when we come up for tenure. These are all very, very valuable things.
Great. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for your comments. I am not out of the academy world, but I do have another type of question. And one of the things that concerns me in terms of building ultimately social change, even though we know that it's not going to happen directly from research, we know research is very important toward that. The other thing is I've never seen a significant social change movement or significant policy shift happening without a multicultural group of people pushing it forward. And one concern that I have in terms of the whole work-life world, and I've been on the fringes of it through the labor movement since probably the late 80s, is that it is not diverse. And so I'm wondering if you see students coming up, if students are encouraged of, other cultural and ethnic groups to grab onto this issue, if we're making the connections around immigration and low-wage earners to work life in order to get people more interested and make the links for folks that this is not just, a domain of us, of white women primarily in the United States, but that everyone needs to take hold to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think for me, I find that in the classroom, and I teach in an incredibly diverse school. There's something like 80-plus languages spoken on my campus. And what's interesting for me is most of my students are working full-time. A lot of them have families already. And so in my history of I taught a history of the family class this semester that had 40 students in it. And it was so different from when I had taught it at the University of Virginia as a graduate student with primarily all white students, all who were going to be lawyers, because that's what all the history majors at UVA do. No offense to the lawyers. I'm not. But But and that was for me a really productive conversation, and it was something that my students honestly, again, I think it speaks to Tammy's presentation yesterday where she said we have to think of these as not personal problems but as collective problems. And my students all thought, well, this is just how it is. I have to throw together childcare, and if I'm going to go to school, and my kid's in the hospital, and I have to make a choice about whether I'm going to go to class, and all these sorts of things. And throughout the semester, we started to talk about, okay, this is not, it doesn't have to be this way. This is how this history has evolved and how we do it. And I've been trying for my year at Queens to think about ways in which we can integrate that. And that's one of the questions we didn't get a chance to get to about how we can get on our campuses. We talked about it with business students, also recognizing that not all students are 18 and, just coming to school straight out of high school and not dealing with these issues themselves. And I found that to be an extraordinarily productive conversation that I was able to have with my students, and hopefully they learned some stuff from me as well. I'd hope. Their exams, there was some evidence that we had. But, I think, and that really struck me as well in terms of just even choosing the sources for my class. And I think that's an area, if we need globalization to be talked about, I think obviously we need to continue to ask questions about class and race as well as gender and sort of the managerial level and what have you.
Mm-hmm. Some of the professional associations are helpful in this regard. My main professional association is called the Academy of Management, and it's a very large organization of management scholars, which has a number of subgroups, communities within that, one of which is the Gender and Diversity in Organizations division, and that is sort of the home for most work-family research among management scholars. It also has a particular focus on increasing representation of underrepresented people in all sorts of organizational settings, and in developing women and minority graduate students, junior faculty, et cetera, providing them with mentorship, so that there are places where there is a lot of support and focus really paid to that particular attention, although we are a pretty homogeneous group up here today.
What I find interesting is because we have funded, obviously, in work and family for nearly 15 years, but we've been increasing our funding on aging. And the aging community, that as I pull together meetings of the aging community, it's much more diverse. And I don't know what happened if work-family grew out of a woman's issue and it grew out of the managerial level of firms, and that's where some of these patterns got set up. But clearly, the different communities have different makeups, and we do need to be much more diverse. Yeah.
I think that one of the things that happened is that there was a real split between work and family and diversity, right? And so when I go to companies and it includes the diversity managers, in addition to the work and family, you get a very diverse group. When it's just work and family, you tend to get a much wider female kind of mix, and I see that as a real opportunity. A lot of the issues talked about in terms of diversity are work and family issues, and I would argue vice versa. A lot of the issues that we're talking about are diversity issues as well.
Yeah. I think we could go on for a long time, but unfortunately, I've been given the hook. Yes. So we're going to have to end, and can you please all join with me in thanking our panelists? Thanks, you all. That's great. It was really
Thank
great.
you. Okay, so that's going to do a break for... No. We take the breaks of what give you the oxygen for the rest of the time.